Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast from Agriland that keeps you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Charles O'Donnell and I'm joined by O'Brien and Louise Hickey. Well, this week has seen a number of interesting developments, including the release of new storm names by Met Éireann and the UK Met Office, which includes native Irish names. So if there's any Conals, Darras or Nishas listening, your names made the cut for this storm season. On a more sombre note, there have been renewed warnings from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine on the disease blue tongue and the impact that it would have on our ability to trade with countries outside of the EU if we lost our blue tongue free status. The warning comes after a fresh case of blue tongue in the UK this week, the first case since the spring. But we'll start this week with an update on grant aid for slurry storage. Farmers may have been wondering if mass underground slurry tanks may be eligible for the grant aid. The Department of Agriculture has provided clarification on this. Aisling, what do farmers need to know here?
Yes, Charles. We spoke last week here on the podcast about how Minister for Agriculture Charlie McConalogue published his department's official plan to progress the objective of retaining our nitrates derogation beyond 2025. And there were a list of measures outlined in that plan, and one of those was the Nutrient Importation Storage Scheme. So the scheme had been promised in last year's budget and it will be rolled out to farmers under TAMS. Now, the scheme will provide a 70% grant for additional storage facilities on farms for managing the importation of organic fertilisers. So this week, Agriland technical beef specialist Breffney O'Brien got in touch with the Department of Agriculture because, as you said, some farmers out there were wondering what maybe the T's and C's, the terms and conditions of this scheme would be in terms of slatted tanks or, mass underground storage facilities for slurry. So he was told that underground mass concrete tanks will not be eligible for grant aid under this nutrient importation storage scheme. However, they may become eligible under a separate measure. So many farmers, as you said, they'd hoped that maybe these underground concrete tanks would fall under the remit of the nutrient importation storage scheme. But the department has confirmed that the investment items will be limited to circular slurry stores, geomembrane lined stores and manure pits. And they said that this is to ensure that the facility will continue to be available for slurry importation. So the scheme will have its own dedicated investment ceiling of €90,000 per holding, solely for nutrient importation storage. And in the case of partnership applications, that investment ceiling rises to €160,000 per holding. So when it comes to grants for underground slurry tanks, the department said that farmers meeting the necessary criteria can currently apply for a 40% grant aid under TAMS 3, and it's 60% for the case of young farmers. Now, that actually comes in at a ceiling level of €90,000 per holding as well. Now, TAMS, of course, is divided into a number of tranches, and tranche 4 is currently open and it closes for applications on the 6th of September. So that closing date is just around the corner if farmers are interested in applying for that or other measures under that scheme. So although the underground mass concrete slurry stores are not eligible for this new scheme announced by the department, details still have to emerge on another aspect that was outlined in this department plan to secure the derogation, and that involved the minister seeking permission from the European Commission for separate grant aid. And he said that this provision would be made for a new and separate exempt development threshold for independent nutrient storage as part of a review of planning regulations. So what we know at the moment is that permission is being sought from the Commission to implement a 60% grant and a separate ceiling of €90,000 for farmers for nutrient storage from next January. So details currently are sparse about this. And farm lobby groups, of course, are requesting to meet the department to make sure that they know what the T's and C's are and what any measures might look like for farmers and what might be included in this new measure. So the hopes are that maybe underground mass concrete slurry stores could be included in that measure, Charles. But as we always say here on the Farming Week, the devil is in the details. So stay tuned to Agriland and we'll keep a close eye on that as it develops. But that's the confirmation that we got this week.
Well, Aisling, you mentioned there the farmer organisations, and a number of them have met this week with Finance Minister Jack Chambers and Public Expenditure Minister Paschal Donohoe to formally make their submissions on Budget 2025. Aisling, what have the farmer orgs said about that meeting?
Yeah, well, it's that time of the year, isn't it, Charles? A flurry of pre-budget submissions to the government from farm organisations and industry bodies ahead of Budget 2025, which, if listeners want to mark on their calendars, and I'm sure they will be rushing to do so, it will be delivered by Minister for Finance Jack Chambers in the Dáil on October 1st. So, as you said, this week there was a number of meetings held. Both the Irish Farmers Association and the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association held separate meetings with Minister for Finance Jack Chambers and Minister for Public Expenditure Paschal Donoghue to essentially set out their stall. So the IFA President Francie Gorman said he told ministers that the current TAMS grant limits will have to take account of higher costs. And he said that additional funding will be needed for the new slurry storage scheme. Now, he said that the delegation from the IFA discussed the significant pressures on farm families due to the massive 57% drop in farm incomes over the last 12 months. And we talked about that previously on the podcast. Those figures outlined in the Teagasc National Farm Survey for 2023, which showed that farm income, the average family farm income, has dropped to just under €20,000 last year. And it's important to note that that survey represents almost 85,000 farms across the country. And the IFA said that the reliefs that currently exist for the agriculture sector have to be extended, and that anything which facilitates generational renewal should be part of a package for agriculture. And I think, Charles, we're likely to see something along those lines in the upcoming budget. A lot of kites have been flown by Charlie McConalogue and others that generational renewal and farm succession will be something that they are looking at. I know that they are setting up that commission to have a look at this. So it'll be interesting to see if there are any measures in budget 2025 as well. Now, as I said, the ICMSA also met with the ministers this week, and they outlined a number of proposals, including the need for the capital acquisitions tax and capital gains tax to be reformed to allow family farms to be transferred without a tax burden. The ICMSA President Dennis Drennan said that the upcoming budget represented the last opportunity for this government, it is their last budget, to make good on their commitments contained in the programme for government to deal with volatility in farm incomes as well. Now, the ICMSA on that has proposed an income support volatility measure with the aim of allowing farmers to deposit money with the state in a good year, which then could be drawn down in a bad year. It makes sense on paper, so it'll be interesting to see if the ministers will consider that as part of their budget planning. And they also said, the ICMSA, that the cost of this measure to the state would be insignificant, but the impact on farm level would be very significant. Now, there was a load of other measures that we've outlined on Agriland that the ICMSA have called for. They also called for the illogical and arbitrary exclusion of calf feeders and robotic scraper systems from the revenue VAT reclaim, which we've spoken about at length here on the podcast, for them to be brought back into that, or for it to be adjusted so that they can be allowed to be reclaimed on it. They're also calling for a dairy beef calf scheme, which would deliver €100 to the calf rearer and €100 to the finisher. And they want acres to be extended to 70,000 farms as well. That would be an interesting call, because I think the department are already struggling with the numbers that they have, Charles, it's fair to say. So if we were increasing it to 70,000, I'm not sure how that might play out as well on the ground. But more measures from the ICMSA on Agriland, and you can check those out as well. But yeah, the farm organisations very much setting out their stall with the ministers ahead of the budget this week.
And just while we're on the budget, Aisling, last week there was a controversy over the residential zoned land tax and the suggestion that the tax might be deferred for a year. Now, that proposal from Finance Minister Jack Chambers provoked a bit of a backlash from his coalition partners in the Green Party. Can you bring us up to speed, Aisling, on what's been happening this week on that front?
Yes, Charles. So the RZLT has become quite the political football amongst the government partners. As you said, the Finance Minister, Jack Chambers, had proposed last week to defer the tax for a year to ensure that active farmland would be excluded. That followed discussions with his Fianna Fáil colleagues. The proposal to defer the tax was welcomed by farm organisations and by many politicians. Of course, we'd reported that there was huge concerns out there that the scope of this tax could involve a lot of active farmland coming under its remit. But there was strong opposition expressed to the proposal, not only from the opposition benches, but also from Fianna Fáil's government partners, the Green Party. Now, they said this week that they want an exemption for land of active farmers under the tax, but they also want to deal with the issue of speculators sitting on land parcels, waiting for them to increase in value while this country is in the midst of a housing crisis. And we need to build 50,000 homes a year to deal with that crisis, it's been estimated, Charles. And I suppose the whole idea of this tax is to free up this residential land that has been zoned and that we can get building on it as well. So the latest update we have this week from Minister for Finance, Jack Chambers, he told Agriland that he is currently exploring all options on resolving the issues for farmland under this tax. And he said if a viable alternative emerges to deferring the tax, which is set to come into force on February 1st of next year, then he would pursue that option. Now, he said in certain circumstances where land is not vacant and is in use by farmers, it has become clear that the tax could have unintended consequences which could risk the viability of those farms. And he said that would be unfair, disproportionate, and inequitable. Now, he said that last year there was a decision to defer this and to allow farmers to apply to rezone their lands. And he said that process is coming to a conclusion. And the latest information that he's actually received from the Department of Housing is that the vast majority of those rezoning requests made by farmers to local authorities have not been approved. Therefore, that land would currently be subject to this tax next year if no further action is taken. So that is what he is looking at the moment. That is the conundrum here, Charles. So as it stands, what we know is that he had planned to announce this deferral in the upcoming budget. And obviously, given the kickback from the Green Party on this, he's trying to find a way to make this work, that we can see this tax come into force next February. But it'll be interesting to see if he can do that and make it work in this time frame. The countdown is on to the 1st of October, so we'll have to see what resolution there is out there, because this tax has caused an awful lot of worry to a lot of farmers out there across the country. And, you know, farm organizations, farmers, the industry at large, you know, everybody wants to see this resolved so that we can allay those fears, but also, you know, that the tax can free up that land, which is needed to address the housing crisis as well.
And Aisling, just on farm finance issues, you came across some interesting research this week on the shadow wage on family dairy farms. What's that a reference to?
Yeah, I have to say, I hadn't heard of a shadow wage previously, Charles. So this was a study carried out by Teagasc and the University of Galway, and it all focused on investigating the unpaid labour element of milk production. So the findings of the academic paper, which is currently under peer review, were published in the latest edition of the Teagasc science magazine T Research. So what we were told is that a shadow wage is the hypothetical or implicit wage rate, which reflects the value of labour provided by individuals who are actually not formally compensated for their work. So that term covers the economic value of unpaid labour, such as family labour on farms. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who that applies to as well. So what we learned is that the average shadow wage or economic value of farm family labour on Irish dairy farms has been estimated at a rate of €30.97 per hour. So in order to achieve that, the researchers determined how much each hour of unpaid family labour adds to the value of farm output. And with this value, then it's referred to as the shadow wage of labour. So the study notes that with the expansion of milk production, as we know in the post-quota era, there's been a huge increase in the demand for labour on family farms, which are met by a mixture of both family and hard labour. And they used data from the 2019 Teagasc National Farm Survey, and they said that as the size of a farm increases, so does the level of shadow wage. So on farms with less than 43 cows, the shadow wage stood at just over €12 an hour. But for holdings then with more than 83 cows, that figure rose to almost €44 an hour. So as the shadow wage increases, the study found so does the demand for hard labour, which the researchers said on average, family and hard labour act as substitutes essentially on Irish dairy farms. And what was also interesting too in this study, Charles, was the role of agricultural education. And they found that the average shadow wage for those with formal agricultural education is actually almost twice that of those without. So it's €34 versus €19 per hour. And the research found that farm operators who have undertaken formal agricultural training reported higher levels of farm income. And in conclusion, the researchers said that their findings support the idea that policies to increase formal agricultural education for farmers are essential for farms' viability and for the industry's future as well. And they recommended continued support for agricultural education. And they added that an improved understanding of the supply and demand dynamics between family and hired labour on farms is essential to the long-term viability of the dairy sector. So they did say that more research is needed. And when it comes to smaller farms as well, interestingly, they said that financial support may be needed to help those farmers hire extra labour during busy periods, particularly the spring calving season, for example. Because on those farms, there might not be able to afford extra labour. There could be an age issue as well and an increased workload as well. So that is something for the government to consider as well on that. But a really interesting piece of research, the shadow wage. And I'm sure a lot of people out there around kitchen tables will go, oh, is that what it's called?
Well, for all livestock farms, shortages of straw continues in the background as an area of concern. Throughout the year, stocks of straw have been imported from the UK to make up the deficit. Aisling, we learned this week how much straw exactly has been imported in the first 7 months of the year.
Yes, Charles, a lot of talk about straw, particularly earlier this year among farmers, as supplies became tight in some parts of the country following poor yields due to that adverse weather. And earlier this year as well, the National Fodder and Food Security Committee was told that straw was in short supply and that stocks were being imported from the UK to make up that shortfall. Now, the Department of Agriculture confirmed to us this week that just over 14,800 tonnes of straw was imported into Ireland from the UK in the first 7 months of this year. And the data shows that between January and the end of July, there were some 841 consignments brought into the country from the UK. Now, the department's data shows that almost 986 tonnes of straw was imported in from the UK in 45 consignments during 2023. And in the previous year, there were just 7 consignments of straw imported from the UK, which totaled 38 tonnes. So it lays bare, Charles, the huge jump in straw imports earlier this year, responding to that huge shortfall. Now, it's interesting to note that the department does carry out checks and official controls on hay and straw, which enters the EU for the first time at Irish ports of entry. Of course, the UK now, as a result of Brexit, being a third country in the eyes of the EU. And those checks include documentary checks, identification, and physical checks as well. A portion of those consignments are actually selected for a full physical inspection as well, including sampling if it's deemed necessary. And the department told us if a consignment does not meet the import requirements, it may be rejected and then either re-exported or destroyed. And there is a list of approved third countries, which includes the UK and a list of other ones that you can find on Agriland as well. But it just goes to show a huge amount of straw imports from the UK to make up that shortfall earlier this year.
Yeah, Aisling, the issue of straw has proved controversial. Many listeners will remember very recently that the minister had to backtrack on plans to suspend the straw incorporation measure for this year.
Yeah, so the minister had brought forward that proposal because he was worried about fodder and particularly straw supplies for this winter. And look, he did row back on, proposing that the straw incorporation measure was suspended for this year. That is currently running, but he did launch the new baling assistance payment or BAP scheme, as we've previously spoken about on the show. And just a reminder, that scheme, it actually closes for applications. You have to tell the department that you are going to go ahead with it before September 30th. So another month in or around. The scheme will offer a payment of €175 a hectare to farmers who choose to bale straw on all eligible straw incorporation measure parcels rather than chopping it and incorporating it back into the soil. So again, that date is the 30th of September. You have to notify the department in writing if you want to get involved in the BAP scheme and withdraw some of your SIM parcels and take advantage of that if you feel that's the route that you want to go this year. And the department has said over 2,600 applicants were approved into the Strong Corporation measure this year. But that number will be subject to change now, depending on the uptake of the BAP scheme. And it'll be interesting to see how many farmers do that. But I am hearing from some tillage farmers around the country that there are some good yields of straw out there as well. But there is huge demand given the experience of last winter.
Now, one thing we haven't spoken about too much lately is people using private farmland for walking, hiking, and similar activities, which sometimes can be a source of tension with farmers. But Aisling, one farm organisation has put that back on our radar this week.
Absolutely. So as you said, hill walking, it's a very popular activity in this country, Charles. Plenty of clubs and individuals out there taking to the hills and mountains every week of the year. And of course, the majority of people behave very responsibly, it has to be said. But the Irish Natura and Hill Farmers Association, the INHFA, said this week that an increase in the amount of walking festivals, particularly along the Western Seaboard, is driving concern amongst farmers. Now, the organisation claimed that many of those festivals have been organised without any farmer engagement, and they said that there has been an increase in the number of farmers contacting them about walking tours and festivals which are organised across their lands but without any consent at all. And Vincent Roddy, the INHFA president, said for many farmers, the first time they actually hear about these events is when they see it advertised on social media. And he said many of the walkers participating on these tours have to pay a fee. So he said that it was incredible to the point of it being contemptuous that the organisers of these tours seem to think that they have a right to make money on the back of someone else's property and to not even, in Vincent Roddy's words, have the basic decency to inform the farmers involved and to ask their permission in advance. And he also said that the whole issue of commonage and hill land is also something that needs maybe a bit of clarification amongst the public. He said that all hill land is not commonage, which is a point that many members of the public don't understand. And also the legal status of commonage land is also misunderstood by a lot of people who think that commonage land is public land. But he said in reality, commonage is also private land, which is held by a number of shareholders. And he said it's critical that everybody understands that unless you're a shareholder on those lands or you have been given permission to walk on the lands by the shareholders, then essentially you're trespassing. And he said it was vital that members of the public recognise that their leisure activities are being accommodated on the back of farmer goodwill, which should not be taken for granted. And he said, unfortunately, when tour groups behave like this without farmer consent, they're compromising this goodwill and everybody loses. So it's a stark warning to hiking clubs and people who organise walking tours this week, Charles, from the INHFA, to make sure they get permission before they take the tour and go up the hills and the mountains and enjoy the walks.
Finally this week, students who completed their Leaving Certs earlier in the summer received their third level offers from the CAO in the last few days. Louise, now that we know those first round offers, do we know if points are going up or down for agricultural science courses?
Well, Charles, over 56,000 students would have received offers from the CAO this week. The offers consist of 52,000 for level 8 courses and just over 31,000 for courses at level 7 or level 6. For agricultural science courses in particular, most points across the board have decreased this year compared to last year. This comes as there was also an inflation of 68% of all grades by 7.5% after the marking process. So if a student was thinking of studying agricultural science at UCC this year, they would have seen points decrease by a good bit, from 496 to now 446. The agricultural science course at the University of Galway has also decreased its points from 423 to 409. Points remain stagnant at UCD for ag science, remaining at 400 for the second year in a row now. Meanwhile, points for agricultural science at SETI Waterford have decreased slightly from 382 to 379. Interest in veterinary studies is still quite high, with first preference level 8 applications increasing by 4%. Total mentions of veterinary, however, fell slightly by 6%. Points for veterinary medicine at UCD remain high at 589, which not everybody who receives the required points is guaranteed getting a college place. If a student was thinking of studying veterinary nursing at UCD, they might have been pleased to learn that points actually dropped from 518 to 499. The advice from the CEO going forward is that students are not to delay accepting an offer, applicants can continue to check the status of their application online at any point. Then there will be a second round of offers that will be issued to fill any remaining vacancies. Round 2 offers will be made from September 9th until September 11th. The National Parents and Students Leaving Cert Helpline continues to operate until Saturday, August 31st from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. each day.
Thanks, Louise. That almost brings us to the end of the show. Just before we go, we have a couple of people to congratulate. Firstly, congratulations to Clare farmer and businessman John Daveron, who has been awarded an honorary doctorate in science by the University of Galway for his work on farm diversification and conservation on his own family farm. And secondly, congratulations to Peter Morgan from County Down and his dog Nantmel Bob, who claimed first place in the singles class of the National Sheepdog Trials, which took place recently in County Donegal. As a result of his win, he will now lead the Irish team in the upcoming International Sheepdog Trials. You can check out our articles on both John and Peter and all today's stories on Agriland.ie and the Agriland app. But we'll leave it there for today. Please don't forget to rate, review and follow The Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love if you could spare some time to give us 5 stars and share The Farming Week with anyone you think might be interested. From Aisling, Louise and myself, all the best.